Hey everyone, how's it going? Colin from Gaming Through the Ages here. Previously on this channel, I've reviewed Tales of Arise, and in that video, I made a lot of references to other Tales games, such as Tales of Symphonia and Tales of Vesperia. So I wanted to go back and play the first Tales game, Tales of Phantasia. Since I'm a fan of the series, I want to play through all of the ones that I've missed. And this is where I start, right here in the beginning. Is this game a relic of the past, showing that the formula really needed to be refined before it could achieve greatness? Or is it a fun play in its own right that gamers should check out? Let's get into it. Tales of Phantasia is the first Tales game. Originally, it was released on the Super Famicom, and a PlayStation port was released a few years later. Both versions were only released in Japan. America had to wait until the GameBoy Advance port, which did not review well in the slightest. That's the version I tried years ago when it came out, and I thought that the combat was clunky, and I couldn't really see anything with the screen crunch, so I put it down. This time, I opted to play the PlayStation version. There are two fan translations available, the one offered by Fantasian Productions and one offered by Team Gemini. Fantasian Productions offers a translation that acts more like a localization, which means that they change some aspects of the script to hit better with a Western audience, or at least what the team thinks will hit better with a Western audience. Gemini offers a more literal translation. Well polished, but they're not ham-fisting Western jokes in there where they don't belong. I opted to play the Gemini translation because their translation fits my own translation philosophy. While no language can be translated into one another one-to-one, there is a difference between an idiomatic translation where you adapt grammatical units but keep the sense preserved, and a free translation where the translator's vision is just as important as the source text. Gemini maintains the integrity of the original product in my eyes, therefore I played that one. The PlayStation port itself offers a few graphical upgrades, a 3D world map, introduces the skit system to Tales of Phantasia, and from what I've read, refines Tales of Destiny's battle system. I chose to play this version for two reasons. The first was that I was intimidated by the game, so I wanted to play the best version possible. And because I bought an X-Station for my PlayStation and I wanted a chance to use it. Hence, the PlayStation version. Alright, enough about how I'm playing the game. Let's actually talk about the game. Now for this section, I'm going to be covering the story. I try to avoid some story spoilers, but there will be some things spoiled, particularly when talking about characters and character motivations. If you'd rather not see that, go to the timestamp here on the screen to be taken to the gameplay section. But in any case, let's get on with the story. The game starts off with a scripted sequence. Four adventurers are fighting Daos, an evil king they're trying to seal away. They succeed, and then the game jumps forth to the main character, Kless. Kless is your stereotypical Tales sword character like Lloyd, Yuri, or Alphen. He's studying the sword under his father when his best friend Chester comes to ask him to go hunt with him. After exploring the town a bit, you go with him to the forest to do just that, but right when Kless and Chester are about to head back, they hear a terrible noise. They come back to find that the entire village had been raided by soldiers, and everyone was killed, including Chester's and Kless's families. Devastated by the loss, Kless heads to the capital city in order to stay with his uncle so that he can figure out what to do. In the middle of the night, however, his uncle betrays him, and Kless finds himself locked in a dungeon. He's rescued by the voice of a mysterious woman who guides him out. She dies shortly thereafter, but Kless does find Mint, a young Methodist who was similarly imprisoned. Methodists are not a Protestant sect thrown into the game, but it's how the clerics of the game are called. Together they escape the prison, but are sorely wounded in the attempt. Kless wakes up in the house of a man named Morrison, who knows him and his father. Morrison reveals that the reason why the village was razed was because the soldiers were looking for the necklace Kless wears. Hearing this, Kless sets out with Chester and Mint to confront the soldiers. Upon discovering them, they find that they are in service to Daos, the evil king banished in the beginning of the game. While they have not summoned Daos yet, they certainly plan to, and Kless attacks. He is easily defeated, however, and Morrison can only think of one spell that will save Kless and his friends from certain doom: time travel. He's able to catch Kless and Mint with the spell, but unable to catch himself or Chester. In their final moments of the present, Kless and Mint see their friends face certain doom. From here, the party travels through first the past and then the future in their quest to stop Daos. The premise is an interesting one. Yes, sealing away the big bad every couple of years is a bit of a trope, but done this early, it is not uninteresting. I found the dynamic between the characters to be good, if a bit simple. Each character has their defining characteristic. Kless is headstrong, but guided by justice. Mint is a warm-hearted woman who constantly has her mother on her mind, even as she slowly realizes what happened to her. Chester is Kless's best friend, but we come to find out that he is a bit of an inferiority complex, which makes for some interesting scenes. While in the past, we also meet party members Klaus and RK. Klaus is dubbed a weird guy because he studies all the time, making him a stereotypical mage character, except he's actually a summoner. The mage character is RK, who's a bit of a tsundere, but combines it with a love of booze and men. Behind her character is a very touching backstory between her and her mother as well. There is another party member, Suzu, who I briefly ran into, but I gotta say that I didn't do the side quest that would put her in the party, so I can't comment on her character, really. Anyway, all of this is to say that the characters you have in your party are all decently fleshed out for a Super Nintendo game. Of course, they don't have the same amount of depth as in Symphonia or in Vesperia, but that is to be expected. What's here is interesting enough, and you can see the roots of how the series achieved the greatness it has. I will say that I found Daos to be a bit of a boring villain. Halfway through the game, RK starts asking some interesting questions, like, why does Daos only attack in these places, but not in those places? What does Daos actually want? The other characters kind of brush her off because, duh, he's the bad guy, but they are interesting questions that the game is trying to make you think about. The execution falters a bit, though. You only learn Daos' motivations literally right before you fight him for the last time. He goes on and on about how he's trying to save his own planet, Dares Karlon, but we've never seen it or heard about it before. It's hard to care about the fate of some other people you've never even seen before when the guy trying to save them is destroying you right now. As such, while Daos is supposed to be somewhat of a sympathetic villain, the way his story is told just prohibits me from really viewing him as anything but a shallow and one-dimensional villain. One last criticism I have about the story is that the game opens up with an interesting hook. Kless's uncle betrays him. I would have loved to see that explored, but you hardly spend any time in the present. Most of the game takes place in either the past or the future, so you never get a chance to wonder why Kless's uncle did what he did. What could have been an interesting story was simply used as a plot device to get Kless into the dungeon, which I see as wasted potential. That being said, overall, I did enjoy the story of this game. Yes, the villain is a bit one-dimensional to me, but the characters in the world it constructs were enough to keep me invested. Something especially thrilling to me is the realization that this game is connected to Tales of Symphonia. I mean, I knew it intellectually, but it was only by exploring the world and realizing that I actually recognized some landmarks because of my time in Symphonia did it really click for me. That's more praise for Symphonia, I suppose, than Phantasia, since Phantasia came out first. But as a player of the series, it increased my enjoyment of Phantasia. I really can't wait to get to Symphonia for a replay to see what I recognize and knew from Phantasia, but we got a lot more Tales games to get through before then. The game plays like your standard RPG, at least when you're in the overworld. You have a world map that connects you from town to town, and while you're in town, you can do the usual fare. Talk to NPCs, buy items, upgrade your equipment, rest, etc. As you explore, You can also find new attack combinations for your main character, which is a nice little perk for being curious. However, what distinguishes the gameplay of a Tales game has always been two things: skits and the combat. In most Tales games, skits are short little scenes that are unlocked when certain conditions are met. The game gives you an alert on the bottom of the screen, and then you watch it. Usually they involve a little humor, and they give you a good insight into how your characters interact with one another. In this game, the system is kinda there, but it's clear it hasn't been refined yet. Skits are presented as a way to get hints on where to go next. You press select on the overworld and a skit will pop up. Most of them will just be telling you where to go, though there are some that are just straight up the characters talking. The downside is that the game doesn't tell you when you've unlocked new skits. Instead, they appear at will. After every event in the story, I think the skits update, but you have to walk outside to the overworld and press select until you've seen one that you've already seen, letting you know that you've hit the end of the new content. As such, I didn't really use the skit system because the game didn't prod me, and I felt like most of the time it was a waste. It's cool to see the beginnings of one of my favorite systems in JRPGs, but clearly this needed to be refined more. I am curious to see when they take on the modern form, as I suspect that Tales of Destiny will largely be the same. Speaking of Tales of Destiny, the combat system in this game is supposed to be about the same as the one in Tales of Destiny, which means whatever gripes I have about it now, I'll probably have when I get there. And oh boy, do I have gripes. Combat takes place on a two-dimensional plane. You control Kless, and you press one button for your standard attack or another to do a special attack. Battles are real-time, and the game gives you two options for controlling Kless to begin with. The first is Auto, which allows the game to just play Kless for you. Naturally, you don't use Auto because you want to play the game. The other option is Semi-Auto. This lets the game control Kless's movement while you pick Kless's attacks. And the other Tales games I've played, Semi-Auto works wonderfully, since it takes your character to the targeted enemy without any direct input from you. In this game, it's almost like there's a rubber band tying Kless to the center of the party. He will run out and attack an enemy. If you're lucky, you'll be able to extend that attack into a combo with a special attack. Sooner or later, though, Kless will decide, oh shit, I gotta run back to my friends, and it's only after he runs halfway across the screen that he'll run back to the enemy and give it another attack. You get the sense of timing after a while, but it is a bizarre design choice that I can only imagine stems from a technical limitation on the Super Nintendo. Technically, there is a workaround for this. You get an earring that, if you equip it to Kless, unlocks the manual control scheme, which allows you to control Kless's movements as well as his attacks. I tried this a few times, and I could tell that it would solve all my problems if I gave myself enough time to get used to it. Here's the problem. It takes up an accessory slot. That means in order to get past the problem the game's created in its own systems, you have to intentionally reduce the stats of your character because they can only equip one power-increasing accessory. As such, I did not use manual in my playthrough outside of a few battles to just test it out. So if you're controlling Kless, who's controlling your other party members? The AI, of course. Now, most of the time, the AI is fine. Characters do good attacks. They generally respond to changing conditions on the battlefield well, and you can choose which spells they can and cannot cast pretty much at will. If you need them to do something specific, you can always give them an order. Here's the problem with that system. I swear the AI only listens to you about half of the time. It's clear that there's some sort of queue system going on, where your order enters into a queue of the actions they're going to do, and it's difficult to predict if they'll do what they want to do first, or if they'll do what you want them to do first. To top it all off, they get even touched by an attack. They will completely forget what you told them to do. This makes combat frustrating during tense fights, because you're kind of fighting with the game to do what it's supposed to do. This can also lead to some lopsided battles. If you manage to keep a boss under attack, for instance, then he'll be able to attack less, which means that your AI teammates will listen to you more. This in turn helps you lay the beat down on the boss. No problems, right? Wrong, because that boss will break free eventually and start laying on the hurt. Bosses like Daos can do a lot of damage to your party fairly quickly, and there's little you can do to stop it from happening. What you're supposed to be able to do is react quickly. Tell Mint to cast Nurse on the party, maybe pop a life bottle or two to get people up, no big deal. But then Daos might attack you again, which means that Mint is not doing what she's supposed to do, and you've just taken more damage. So you try it again, and then Daos attacks again. I'm speaking about Daos in particular because that's where I first noticed it, but the half-responsiveness of the AI companions can really lead to some frustrating difficulty spikes. Overall, though, I was glad to have played Tales of Phantasia. I was intimidated by it, I'm not going to lie. I thought that there were going to be some archaic design choices that would make the game harder than I expected, thus hindering my enjoyment. And there were, as my rant about the combat system shows. But what I didn't expect is how much the overall adventure, the atmosphere, the writing, and the characters would charm me enough to see through the flaws. If you're a fan of the Tales series and want to see where it got its start, I highly recommend playing the PlayStation version. Well guys, that was my review of Tales of Phantasia. I'm really glad that I played it, and I'm looking forward to playing more Tales games in the future. Tales of Destiny will be the next one, and thank God I have the X-Station for that. Have you seen the prices on that game? Next week, I'm going to be taking a look at a favorite superhero of mine, Marvel Spider-Man. We'll see you then. But if you liked this video, or if you like the work that I do here, please feel free to give me a subscribe and a like and a comment. And if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter bio is in the description below. See you guys next week. Have a great evening.